It all started with a phone call. On a quiet evening in 1980, Dorothy Jane Scott's parents were sitting at home when the phone rang. On the line was a man they didn't recognize. His voice was chilling, calm, confident, and cruel. He said he had Dorothy. He said he loved her. He also said he would kill her. For months, these calls had been coming, always directed at Dorothy, and always terrifying. Sometimes the caller described details of her day, what she was wearing, where she had been, who she was with. Other times, his tone was more affectionate, claiming he wanted to take care of her. But the next moment, his words would turn dark, filled with threats of violence. Notice how terrifying this must have felt. A young woman, just 32 years old, a single mother trying to raise her son, knowing that someone was out there, watching her every move. On May 28, 1980, Dorothy went to a late-night hospital visit with two co-workers. She never came back. Hours later, her car was found burning in an alley. Dorothy herself was gone. The strange phone calls didn't stop. They continued, for years. This is the story of Dorothy Jane Scott, a kind and quiet woman from California, whose life was stolen by someone who seemed to know everything about her, a man who, to this day, has never been identified. And it all began with those phone calls. Before we talk about the night Dorothy vanished, we need to understand who she was. Because Dorothy wasn't just a victim of a crime. She was a daughter, a mother, and a friend. Dorothy Jane Scott grew up in Anaheim, California, raised in a loving and stable household. Her parents, Jacob and Vera, were hardworking, deeply religious people. Dorothy was described as compassionate and dependable, the kind of person who always tried to help others before thinking of herself. Friends remembered her as gentle, sometimes shy, but always thoughtful. She wasn't someone who chased excitement or danger, quite the opposite. She lived a quiet, routine life. She worked as a secretary at a local store. She took care of her 4-year-old son, Sean, and she went to church regularly. She didn't drink, didn't go out to bars, and rarely dated. Her life revolved around family and work. If anything, her world was small, which makes the events that followed even more chilling, because it meant that whoever was watching Dorothy knew her very well. Her parents recalled that she was deeply devoted to her son. She had even moved back in with them to make raising him easier. Every plan she made, every decision, was with Sean in mind. That's what makes this case so hard to hear. Dorothy was not reckless. She was not living dangerously. She was cautious, protective, and rooted in routine. And yet, someone had chosen her. Someone was determined to invade her life. The first sign came months before Dorothy disappeared. She began receiving strange phone calls at home and at work. At first, she thought it was a prank. But then, the caller began describing intimate details of her daily life. What she wore that day, where she had been, who she had spoken to. This wasn't random. Someone was watching. Sometimes the man's voice was kind, almost pleading. He told Dorothy that he loved her. He said he wanted to take care of her, but his words always shifted, sliding into dark threats. He told her he would cut her into pieces. Notice how unsettling this is, a man who shifts from affection to menace within seconds. It created a terrifying psychological trap. Dorothy couldn't predict what he would say next or what he was capable of. Her friends said she became more cautious. She started considering carrying a gun. She even took self-defense classes. But she didn't share much about the calls beyond her immediate circle, likely because she didn't want to frighten her parents. What no one knew at the time was that this caller was escalating. The police were notified, but in 1980 there was little they could do without proof of an actual crime. Stalking laws were virtually non-existent. Telephone tracing technology was unreliable. And so the calls continued. The predator was circling closer. Dorothy's final day began like any other. She went to work. She picked up her son from her parents. She attended a company meeting. Nothing unusual. But that night, one of her co-workers, Conrad Bostron, fell ill with what looked like a spider bite. Concerned, Dorothy and another colleague, Pam, offered to drive him to the hospital. It was around 9 p.m. At the hospital, doctors confirmed it was serious enough to treat, so they stayed for hours. Dorothy was patient and supportive, making sure Conrad was comfortable. Around 11 p.m., she went outside briefly to move her car closer to the exit so they wouldn't have to walk far when it was time to leave. Notice this small detail. She didn't tell her coworkers where she was going. She simply said she'd be right back. Minutes later, when they walked outside, Dorothy's car came speeding toward them. Its headlights blinded them as it raced past. They waved, thinking maybe she was rushing home to her son. But then, the car never stopped. It disappeared into the night. 2 hours later, police found the car burning in an alley miles away. There was no sign of Dorothy. When the police were notified, the response was slow. Some speculated she had chosen to leave, though her family knew instantly that wasn't true. She would never abandon her child. The truth was simpler and far darker. Dorothy had been taken, and the man who had been calling her had finally acted on his threats. The following days were agony for Dorothy's family. Her parents sat by the phone, waiting for news. But what came instead was a nightmare. The man who had tormented Dorothy for months now turned his attention to them. He called the house again and again. Sometimes he asked if Dorothy was home. Other times he taunted them, saying he had her. He described details that made it clear he knew what happened that night. Imagine the horror. Their daughter was missing, her car found burning, and yet the phone kept ringing, as if the killer wanted to remind them he was still out there, listening, watching. Police tried to trace the calls, but the technology at the time only allowed a trace if the caller stayed on the line for more than a minute. He never did. He would say just enough, then hang up. For 4 years, Dorothy's parents endured this torment. The calls always came when Vera, her mother, was alone in the house. As soon as Jacob answered, the caller hung up. The case became a haunting mystery. There were no strong suspects, no clear evidence. It seemed as though Dorothy had vanished without a trace. Until August 1984. Workers discovered human remains in a remote area near Anaheim. DNA testing later confirmed the worst. It was Dorothy Jane Scott. She had been murdered. The phone calls stopped. The discovery of Dorothy's remains confirmed what her family had long feared, but it brought no closure. The investigation into her murder quickly stalled. Detectives had little physical evidence, and the mysterious caller was still their only lead. Some believed the man might have been someone Dorothy knew from work. Others thought he was an acquaintance who had become obsessed with her. But no one was ever arrested. Her parents gave interviews, pleading for answers. They described the calls, the terror Dorothy endured, and their frustration with the lack of police action. They pointed out what many observers also noticed, that Dorothy had reported being stalked for months, but no meaningful steps were taken to protect her. This wasn't unique to her case. In the early 1980s, stalking was not considered a serious crime until it escalated into violence. Police departments often dismissed it as harassment or a personal issue. For Dorothy, those missed warnings proved fatal. Her case became a chilling example of how the system failed women facing threats, long before anti-stalking laws were established. And yet, her killer remains unidentified to this day. Dorothy's case remains unsolved. There were leads over the years. A co-worker with possible motives, an ex-boyfriend who acted suspiciously, even theories about a stranger who had followed her from work. But nothing was ever proven. The only consistent clue was the caller. Police believed the man was obsessed with Dorothy and had been watching her closely for months. But without advanced technology, every trace attempt failed. Her son, Sean, grew up without his mother. In later interviews, he described the void in his life, the absence that shaped his entire childhood. He remembered her kindness only through stories told by his grandparents. Notice how devastating this is. Not just the murder itself, but the ongoing damage done to a family. Dorothy's parents spent the rest of their lives waiting for justice that never came. Even today, true crime researchers and online investigators revisit her case, hoping that modern forensic techniques or new witnesses might finally reveal the truth. But as of now, Dorothy's murderer has never been caught. Though Dorothy Jane Scott's case remains unresolved, her story has left an enduring mark. Her parents spoke out publicly for years, pushing for better protections for women facing threats. They emphasized that stalking was not a harmless obsession. It was a pattern of control and violence that could escalate into tragedy. In the decades since, laws have changed. Stalking is now recognized as a crime in all 50 states. Police departments have protocols for handling such cases. Technology allows for call tracing, and victims have more resources than Dorothy ever did. It's heartbreaking to realize that these changes came too late for her. But her case continues to be studied, both by law enforcement and by the true crime community, as a reminder of the dangers of ignoring warning signs. Dorothy's story is not only about loss, it's about awareness. It's about a system that once failed, and the ongoing fight to make sure it doesn't happen again. Her memory lives on through her son, who carries the story of the mother he barely knew, and through every person who hears her case and understands that behind every headline, there is a life, a family, and a legacy. Dorothy Jane Scott wanted nothing more than to raise her son, work hard, and live quietly. Instead, her name became a warning, and a call for justice that still echoes today.